the impossible footprints of Laetoli. The story begins with something deceptively simple. Footprints, not bones, not tools. Just the impressions of a being walking across soft volcanic ash. But what was uncovered at Laetoli in Tanzania was not supposed to exist. Not in that layer of earth, not in that epoch, and certainly not in that shape. When Mary Leakey's team brushed away the ash in 1976, they revealed a walking pattern almost indistinguishable from modern humans. A pronounced heel strike, a strong arch, a forward-facing big toe. It was a stride that should not appear for almost 3 million years. And yet, there it was, sealed beneath hardened tuff, locked between geological layers far older than the official human story allows. At first, the discovery was celebrated, but when the dating results were confirmed, 3.6 million years, a quiet panic began to spread through academic circles. The footprints were too advanced for Australopithecines, too modern for any known ancestor, and too problematic for the evolutionary timeline. In private correspondence later leaked online, one researcher admitted that the prints looked like someone walked there yesterday, but the narrative could not change. It was easier to reinterpret the evidence than rewrite the past. So the journals published a compromise. These must have been made by an ape with an unusually human gait. A theory built on hope, not evidence. Over the next decades, more anomalies emerged, additional prints found nearby, even a suspected kneeling impression, but each one tightened the tension. Behind closed doors, geologists and paleoanthropologists argued over the data, some insisting the evidence pointed to a form of early human far older than accepted. Funding for extended excavations was abruptly cut. Access to certain sections of the site was restricted. Papers attempting to challenge the standard interpretation were rejected without review. What remains today is a sanitized story. Ancient hominins left odd footprints, but the deeper truth is avoided. The prints are anatomically modern. The dating is sound, and no known species fits. If the Laetoli walkers were human or human-like, then our timeline collapses. Humanity becomes millions of years older. Entire chapters of our origin story vanish into the ash. And perhaps that is why this revelation was softened, reshaped, and ultimately buried beneath layers of academic caution. Because if these footprints were allowed to speak plainly, they would tell us something forbidden. Humans walked the earth long before history was ready to admit it. The 2.8 million-year-old stone tools of Lomekwi in 2011 on the remote, wind-swept plains west of Lake Turkana, a research team uncovered something that scientifically should not exist. Stone tools that were older than the human species itself. The discovery came almost by accident after a GPS error led the researchers off their intended route and into an untouched patch of land. There, half buried in sediment, lay massive, intentionally shaped stone cores and flakes, unmistakable signs of intelligent toolmaking. When radiometric dating placed them at 2.8 million years old, the room fell silent. It was a date that shattered everything. The tools were too early, too advanced, too deliberate. According to the official timeline, Homo did not yet exist. Such craftsmanship should not belong to any known species of the time. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Controlled force, directional strikes, and repeated patterns of manufacturing. The tools weren't crude experiments. They were purposeful, functional, and made by hands that understood leverage, weight distribution, and the physics of impact. But instead of rewriting human history, the discovery triggered something else: immediate damage control. The first academic papers softened the language. Proto-toolmakers, behavioral experimentation, transitionary cognitive evolution. Anything to avoid the obvious implication someone intelligent was making stone tools long before humans entered the story. Within months, funding proposals for extended excavation were declined. Requests to re-examine nearby sediment layers were not a priority, and the team's follow-up research was quietly redirected toward less controversial regions. Behind the scenes, competing institutions argued over the publication rights, not because they wanted to champion the discovery, but because they wanted to control its interpretation. A handful of researchers suggested that the tools revealed an unknown lineage, a forgotten branch of early humans or an advanced pre-human ancestor lost to time. Those voices were sidelined, their presentations delayed or canceled at major conferences. The message was subtle but firm: this finding was to be contained. Because if the Lomekwi tools were acknowledged for what they truly represented, then the implications were catastrophic. Human intelligence didn't emerge suddenly. It didn't gradually evolve along predictable lines. It may have appeared, vanished, reappeared. A cycle of forgotten civilizations, rising and falling long before the first textbook human took shape. What humanity lost in this suppression is immeasurable. These tools were the fingerprints of a vanished people, a story erased before it could be told. And with their silence, so too vanished the possibility that our species is merely the latest chapter in a much older, deeper human saga. Giza cave system under the Sphinx. For more than 1 century, rumors circulated among Egyptologists, explorers, and military officials about a vast network of tunnels beneath the Giza Plateau, a system older than the pyramids themselves, extending deep under the Great Sphinx. Most dismissed the whispers as myth. But in 2008, when a joint Egyptian-British team conducted ground-penetrating radar scans near the Sphinx's right paw, something extraordinary appeared. Massive voids, descending corridors, and what looked like chambers stacked beneath the monument like the floors of an ancient underground complex. The data was clear, the geometry intentional, the scale staggering, and then almost instantly, every report vanished. It wasn't the first suppression. Back in the 1800s, British diplomat Henry Salt recorded entering a cavern system beneath the plateau, describing long passageways and chambers filled with bat colonies. His guide claimed the tunnels extended for miles. Salt's records later disappeared into private collections. In the 1930s, Egyptian workers stumbled into another shaft while building homes near Giza. They found carved walls and a staircase descending into darkness. The opening was sealed the same week. Then came the most unsettling confirmation in 1997. The Egyptian government quietly restricted all excavation beneath the Sphinx, labeling the area a military security zone. Official statements insisted there was nothing unusual beneath Giza. But leaked documents from the 2008 radar scans told another story. Chambers large enough to hold dozens of people, hallways carved with clear geometric precision, and a central void directly beneath the Sphinx's chest, perfectly symmetrical. Someone built an underground complex with engineering far older than dynastic Egypt. Someone with advanced knowledge of astronomy and stonework. Someone whose identity does not fit any accepted historical timeline. Why the secrecy? The answer lies in power. If an older civilization existed beneath Giza, predating the pharaohs, predating agriculture, it destroys the foundation of mainstream Egyptian chronology. Billions in tourism revenue depend on the current narrative. Global academic prestige rests on preserving Egypt's official 5,000-year timeline. And deep beneath the Sphinx, if inscriptions or artifacts exist that point to an earlier epoch of engineered structures, then the world would be forced to confront the unthinkable. Egypt inherited Giza, not built it. The caves remain sealed to this day. Independent researchers are denied access. Journalists are escorted away. The tunnels were mapped, yet no maps have been released. What humanity lost by burying this truth is immeasurable. Beneath that ancient lion body lies a story older than empire, older than writing, older than memory itself. A doorway into a forgotten age we were never meant to rediscover. The 300,000-year-old Harrat Khaybar structures. Across the black lava fields of Harrat Khaybar in Saudi Arabia lies a mystery so vast it can only be seen from the sky. Stretching across hundreds of kilometers are stone formations, perfect geometric shapes, long basalt walls, circular enclosures, and thousands of desert kites that narrow into precise triangular funnels. From the ground, they appear random, meaningless. But from above, they form patterns of intentional engineering, like blueprints etched into the earth. When satellite imagery first revealed their true scale, archaeologists quietly panicked. These structures were not supposed to exist, certainly not at the ages suggested by the volcanic terrain they sit upon. Initial surveys placed many of them at over 300,000 years old, embedded between ancient lava flows that date long before Homo sapiens is meant to have emerged. Yet their design is unmistakably human. The kites appear to have been used as massive animal drive systems requiring coordinated planning, long-term settlement, and a population capable of mobilizing large-scale labor. This wasn't the work of nomadic hunters. This was the work of a civilization, and not a small one. Tens of thousands of stone structures, built with precision, spanning regions the size of countries. But when dating anomalies began to circulate within academic circles, the response was immediate: reinterpret everything. The official narrative shifted rapidly. These must be Neolithic hunting traps, they insisted. But when researchers pointed out that many structures were trapped between lava layers hundreds of thousands of years old, funding for deeper geological sampling was abruptly withdrawn. Satellite data from key lava fields was reclassified. Field permits became nearly impossible to obtain. A team from Europe attempting to publish evidence for extreme antiquity saw their paper rejected 5 times. Reviewers claimed the conclusions were too disruptive. Why the resistance? The implications were catastrophic to the existing timeline. A 300,000-year-old engineered landscape means Homo sapiens were not the first builders. It implies another intelligence, older, organized, capable of planning across generations, once lived, thrived, and vanished in what is now Western Arabia. It rewrites the entire story of human origins. It suggests civilization is not a recent invention, but a recurring pattern, one that rises, collapses, and leaves behind only stone. Today, the Harrat Khaybar structures sit in silence, guarded more by bureaucracy than by distance. What humanity lost by suppressing their real age is nothing less than the first chapter of our species, a chapter written in stone, erased by time, and sealed beneath fields of ancient fire. If the truth were allowed to surface, our history books would have to begin again. The 200,000-year-old human settlement at Kalambo Falls. In 2019, at the edge of a thundering waterfall between Zambia and Tanzania, researchers uncovered something that should have been impossible: a wooden structure shaped, carved, notched, and joined together with engineering skill, and dated to nearly 200,000 years old. Wood is the first material time destroys. It rots, collapses, disappears long before stone. Yet here, preserved in the oxygen-poor wet sands of Kalambo Falls, lay 2 interlocked logs cut with right-angle joints. They weren't firewood, they weren't debris, they were architecture. Construction. Evidence of a settlement where none should exist. The dating results were devastating to established timelines. Anatomically modern humans were not supposed to build anything advanced until around 10,000 years ago. Yet someone, 20 times older, was shaping wood with technical precision. But the real shock came when microscopic analysis revealed something darker. These logs had been worked with tools more advanced than stone could easily explain. Some cuts were too clean, some grooves too consistent. Several edges appeared to have been rubbed or polished, possibly with composite tools or even early abrasives. The implications were enormous, too enormous. Almost immediately, controversy erupted. Journals hesitated. Critics demanded reinterpretations. Grants for long-term excavation were frozen pending review. The team expected excitement. Instead, they received warnings. One researcher privately admitted that senior archaeologists urged them to reconsider the dating because it would destabilize the field. Even more concerning, satellite mapping of the area, which showed geometric soil disturbances along the river, was quietly restricted. Requests for deeper digs were denied due to environmental risk, despite decades of safe research in the region. Why the sudden pressure? The answer was obvious. If humans, or human-like beings, built complex wooden structures 200,000 years ago, then everything about human emergence collapses. Agriculture is no longer the birth of civilization. Stone architecture is no longer the first engineering. the very idea of a primitive human past dissolves, and most threatening of all, it hints at something catastrophic, that an early intelligent culture existed and vanished, leaving behind almost nothing except the rare traces preserved by accident. Kalambo Falls should have rewritten human history. Instead, it was buried in academic caution, political pressure, and a quiet fear of opening a door no institution wants to open. Because if the world learns that people were building settlements 200,000 years ago, then the question becomes unavoidable. How many civilizations rose and fell before ours? The 172,000-year-old hearths of Klasies River, along the rugged southern coast of South Africa, inside the limestone chambers of Klasies River Cave, lies evidence that should have triggered a global rewriting of human origins, but instead, it was quietly minimized, reinterpreted, and buried under academic footnotes. When excavators sifted through the ash layers in the 1960s and again in the 2000s, they uncovered something profoundly unsettling: organized hearths. Not random fires, but carefully structured fire pits used repeatedly over long periods. Some were bordered with stones, some contained layers of burned bone arranged deliberately. Most troubling of all, the dating was consistent and undeniable: 172,000 years old. Fire is the first fingerprint of intelligence, but this was more than fire. This was cuisine. This was planning. This was controlled heat for cooking shellfish, roasting marrow-rich bones, even possibly for drying meat for storage. Chemical analysis revealed repeated use of the same hearths over thousands of years, a pattern that requires stable, long-term settlement. People did not simply pass through, they lived, cooked, planned, and worked here in cycles that defied the idea of primitive wanderers. But the most controversial finding lay not in the hearths, but in the bones. Some fragments showed cut marks consistent with butchering, including signs of marrow extraction using tools far more precise than expected. Several burnt bone shards appeared to be human. Some researchers suggested cannibalism, but not the desperate, chaotic kind. The marks were clean, repetitive, controlled. Symbolic behavior, ritual, a cultural practice, but any interpretation beyond primitive survival threatened the accepted timeline. Almost immediately, pressure mounted. Journals downplayed the sophistication of the hearths. A major paper describing organized settlement behaviors was held for 2 years, then published with half its conclusions removed. Funding for deeper cave excavation was cut. Requests for more advanced dating methods, which could have pushed the timeline even older, were denied. One researcher later revealed that their supervisors warned them not to use the phrase early complex society because it would cause unnecessary controversy. Yet the truth remained embedded in the cave walls. People 172,000 years ago lived with a level of cultural and technological complexity that should not exist until 10 times later in history. They managed controlled fire, stable diet strategies, settlement patterns, resource planning, all foundations of civilization. If this evidence had been embraced, humanity's story would shift overnight. We would no longer be a young species stumbling into intelligence. We would be the descendants of an ancient, capable lineage whose knowledge survived catastrophes, collapses, and forgotten ages. But the world wasn't ready for that truth. Not academically, not politically, not culturally. So the Klasies River hearths remain what they were never meant to be: a silent, smoldering reminder that civilization did not begin 10,000 years ago, it restarted. The 130,000-year-old Cerutti mastodon site. In 2017, a quiet research paper detonated like a bomb inside the archaeological world. It described a site in Southern California where mastodon bones had been fractured with unmistakable signs of deliberate, intelligent force. Spiral fractures, percussion marks, anvils and hammerstones positioned exactly where a trained butcher would need them. The bones were arranged in a pattern consistent with marrow extraction, a sophisticated survival technique. But it wasn't the behavior that triggered panic. It was the date: 130,000 years old. According to the accepted timeline, humans did not enter the Americas until 15,000 years ago. The Cerutti site pushed that entry back over 100,000 years, 10 times older than allowed. The implications were catastrophic. If true, the entire story of human migration collapses. Land bridges, ice corridors, genetic bottlenecks, all of it becomes irrelevant, and the possibility emerges that an earlier unknown population reached the Americas long before modern humans. Not by accident, not by drift, by design. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Critics didn't question the evidence. They questioned the researchers. Personal attacks, accusations of incompetence, claims that the bones were broken by construction equipment, even though the site was discovered untouched, in undisturbed layers. A senior archaeologist privately admitted the evidence was damning, but refused to endorse it publicly, saying it would destroy too many careers. Another confessed that if the dates were accepted, every textbook has to be rewritten from page 1. Requests for replication were obstructed. A second dig pit, opened quietly by a separate institution, was shut down 2 months later when it produced similar anomalies. Emails later leaked revealed internal debate within major universities about whether publishing follow-up studies would create unnecessary controversy. Funding agencies abruptly withdrew support for projects exploring pre-Clovis populations. What truly terrified the establishment wasn't the age, it was the competence. Whoever occupied the Cerutti site understood tool use, resource processing, and long-distance travel. They weren't primitive. They weren't accidental. They were intelligent, deliberate, and early. Much too early. If humanity or a human-like species reached North America 130,000 years ago, then the modern world is not the first global civilization. It is one of many. A cycle, not a beginning. By dismissing and burying the Cerutti evidence, we lost more than a discovery. We lost a doorway, a chance to understand a chapter of human history erased by time and perhaps erased by intent. The 75,000-year-old Denisovan engineering at Baishiya Karst Cave. High on the frigid edge of the Tibetan Plateau, where oxygen thins and temperatures plunge, lies Baishiya Karst Cave, a place long whispered about in local lore as a dwelling of giants. When researchers first took samples in 2010, no one expected anything groundbreaking. But layer by layer, sediment by sediment, a different story emerged. Not a myth, not folklore, but the fingerprints of a vanished lineage. The Denisovans and what they left behind inside that cave shook the foundations of human history. The cave yielded cut bones, shaped tools, and polished fragments that should not exist at such altitudes. At 3,200 meters above sea level, oxygen levels drop to a point where even modern hikers struggle. Yet 75,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens ever reached the plateau, Denisovans lived, engineered, and thrived there. Genetic analysis later confirmed something astonishing. They possessed a rare gene variant that boosts oxygen efficiency. They weren't just surviving the thin air. They were built for it, adapted, specialized. A high-altitude culture that predated anything known. But the real shock came from the artifacts. Several bone fragments bore parallel incisions, clean, deliberate, almost machined in appearance. Stone tools were shaped with precision angles, indicating advanced knowledge of raw material fracture patterns. One piece, described by a researcher off-record, displayed workmanship inconsistent with expected Paleolithic behavior. In academic language, that is code for something impossible, something too advanced, something that does not fit the timeline. Within months of the first genetic announcements, the cave was placed under strict local and governmental oversight. Independent researchers were denied renewed permits. Drone mapping was prohibited. A rumor circulated among graduate students that deeper chambers had been identified but quietly sealed for safety. One of the lead researchers, who originally spoke enthusiastically to journalists, suddenly stopped giving interviews altogether. Why the sudden silence? Because Baishiya threatens the core assumption of human superiority. If Denisovans engineered tools at high altitude tens of thousands of years before us, then we were not the first advanced humans. We were not the first innovators. We were not the first culture capable of adaptation, planning, and environmental mastery. We were simply the last survivors of a competition whose winners were erased by time. or by catastrophe. But what humanity truly lost in this suppression is the chance to understand a forgotten civilization, a people who lived where no one else dared. A lineage whose knowledge may have outmatched early Homo sapiens, a chapter of our story ripped out because it did not place us at the top. What lies deeper inside Baishiya Cave remains unspoken, unshared, and locked behind bureaucratic gates. And maybe that's the point. Some histories were never meant to be rediscovered. The 12,000-year-old Göbekli Tepe civilization, on a barren hilltop in southeastern Turkey, where shepherds once grazed their flocks among scattered stones, humanity stumbled upon a truth it was never prepared to face. Excavators in the 1990s expected to uncover a simple Neolithic village, maybe a few hearths, some pottery shards. Instead, they unearthed massive T-shaped megaliths, carved with animals, celestial symbols, and abstract forms using a level of precision that should not exist in a world still thousands of years away from metal tools. The dates were undeniable. 12,000 years old. Older than the pyramids, older than agriculture, older than any civilization on record. But the deeper the team dug, the more impossible it became. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a lone monument. It was a complex, multiple circular enclosures, each built with architectural planning, astronomical alignment, and engineering techniques far beyond the capabilities of hunter-gatherers. The pillars weighed up to 20 tons. They were arranged in geometric patterns, and at the center of each enclosure stood a pair of towering monoliths, facing one another like guardians of a forgotten age. The official explanation that roving tribes somehow gathered seasonally to build the world's first temple collapsed under scrutiny. These structures required permanent specialists, stoneworkers, planners, and a supporting infrastructure. This was not a temple. This was a civilization, one that appeared suddenly, without evolutionary buildup, as if inheriting knowledge rather than developing it. Then came the most troubling discovery. Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried, layer after layer of backfill, thousands of tons of soil, packed carefully by human hands to preserve the site. Someone, 10,000 years ago, decided to hide this place, not abandon it. Hide it, protect it, seal a message for the future. When the implications became clear, a familiar pattern began: restrictions, denials, redirections. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who championed the site, suddenly found grant renewals delayed. Independent researchers, requesting access, were told the area was too fragile. Proposed excavations of deeper layers, which might date even older, were blocked. The oldest enclosure, Enclosure H, remains mostly untouched, rumored to contain carvings that would push the timeline back further still. Why the hesitation? Because Göbekli Tepe destroys the core story of civilization. It proves that humans organized, engineered, and built monumental architecture long before agriculture, meaning civilization didn't emerge after farming. Farming emerged after civilization. And if a culture capable of building Göbekli Tepe existed 12,000 years ago, the question becomes inevitable: how many civilizations rose and fell before ours, leaving behind only the stone they couldn't hide? What humanity lost when this truth was softened, minimized, and diverted is profound. Göbekli Tepe was our chance to glimpse a forgotten chapter, an ancient world erased by time, catastrophe, or intention. The oldest temple is not a beginning, it is a remnant. The 14,000-year-old Yonaguni submerged city, off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan, beneath the turquoise waters of the East China Sea, lies a structure so vast, so precise, and so architecturally deliberate that divers still describe the first sight of it as ascending into another world. At a depth of 10 to 25 meters, massive stone terraces rise from the seabed, stepped platforms, right-angled corridors, towering monoliths, and what appears to be a great ceremonial staircase descending into darkness. It looks unmistakably man-made, yet the dating places it at 14,000 years old, at a time when no known civilization should have existed anywhere on Earth. The formation was discovered in 1986, and almost immediately a storm of controversy erupted. Marine geologists insisted it had to be natural. Erosion, fractures, tectonic shifts. But divers brought back evidence that resisted explanation: tool marks on vertical faces, straight-line channels carved with uniform depth, megalithic blocks seemingly quarried from the same source, and geometric patterns too perfect to be the product of chance. Some sections revealed what looked like roadways. Others formed amphitheater-like formations. Most haunting of all was a giant stone face, worn by the sea but still carrying the unmistakable symmetry of intentional carving. When Japanese archaeologist Masaaki Kimura published his findings suggesting the site was artificial, academic backlash was immediate and brutal. Funding evaporated. University administrators pressured him to retract. Several diving expeditions he organized were mysteriously canceled due to permit issues. Government agencies stepped in, declaring the site geologically interesting, but offering no explanation for the architectural precision. Meanwhile, independent divers reported new chambers and tunnels, some extending deeper than the officially recognized boundaries, but their claims were dismissed before the footage could be widely reviewed. The stakes were too high. If Yonaguni was intentional, then human civilization did not begin 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. It began millennia earlier, along coasts that are now underwater due to post-Ice Age sea rise. It would mean entire cultures, cities, and histories were swallowed by oceans, leaving only faint ruins behind. Such a world would not resemble the tidy timeline in textbooks. It would resemble a cycle of rise, collapse, and rebirth. But that wasn't the greatest threat. The true danger was what the site implied. Engineering knowledge existed long before official history allows. Megalithic construction, urban planning, stone shaping on a monumental scale. These were hallmarks of civilization, not scattered tribes. If humanity was building cities before the last ice age ended, then everything we believe about our past is incomplete at best, manipulated at worst. Today, Yonaguni remains unprotected, unrecognized, and deliberately understudied, a submerged city hiding in plain sight. And as each year passes, erosion steals more of its secrets, while institutions maintain a silence that grows heavier with every unanswered question. We were not the first advanced society. We were the first to forget.